Welcome to the Woodbury Word. I'm Wood.
And I'm Dre.
And today we have a very special guest with us. Now, I know I say that all the time, and we say that all the time. We've got a special guest, but now we truly have a special guest with us today. We have Miss Renika Moore with the ACLU with us today. Me and Miss Moore go back a while. We had a friend of mine on from college, and he sort of let it be known that I've got all of the stories that you guys want whenever you're ready. So if he's got all the stories, then Renika's probably holding the bag. So, so we'll keep this on the up and up. But we went to high school together in DC, Archbishop Carroll High School. A beacon on the top of the hill is what they called it, and it definitely shaped me. The circle that I formed from those days and moving forward has been instrumental in my growth and my development. And I just want to share some of that circle with the people. So Renika, welcome to the Woodbury Word.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, Wayne. I feel like we don't get to see each other enough. So happy to be here.
That's right. Yeah. So we're gonna jump right in. Like, who are you? What do you do?
Right. What do I do with myself? So I now run the racial justice program at the ACLU in the ACLU's national office. So the ACLU is both a membership organization. We have over 2 million members, or just about 2 million members around the country. And then we have a national office. So I am, our office, when it's open, is based in New York. But then we also have affiliates in all 50 states and Puerto Rico and DC that we work with that are separate entities, but that we work closely with as well, protecting civil rights and civil liberties for folks around the country. Many of us probably know we've been taking on Trump for the last 4 years, but we've also recently launched a racial justice campaign and really, deepening the organization's commitment to racial justice. And so I've been excited to be working with colleagues as we try to build up, like, where are we going to focus, where are we going to lock in to address some of the biggest, baddest barriers in a campaign we're calling the Systemic Equality Campaign. So folks know systemic racism. So we're trying to see, what does systemic equality look like?
Indeed. So in a time when we, sort of just experienced a terrorist takeover of the Capitol, to be blunt. The ACLU was considered the nation's guardian of our civil liberties. So you take those two things, and how do you guys differ from what they profess to be fighting for? Those groups that sort of exist now that say, we want our freedoms. You can't tell us to wear a mask. You can't tell us that that frankly that minorities are becoming the majority, and thus the structure of how we live is going to change. We want our civil liberties to be recognized and understood. So how do you guys sort of juxtapose yourselves from that crowd?
Right. I mean, I think it's all of us. Like, democracy is for all of us, right? And so and we're fighting for basic rights. Like, this is not just about citizenship. This is about immigrants. This is about people of color. This is about, like, having your vote count. I think part of what happened in terms of the riots and the storming of the Capitol is, like, the attempt to deny the vote of over 80 billion people, and especially the votes of Black folks and the votes of Latinx folks, the votes of people who are saying, like, it's a new day, it's a new time, and we can do better. We can do better than these last 4 years, and we can be better than this country has been, frankly, since its founding. Like, there is more, and we're going to demand more, and we're going to push for more. And I think what we're saying is, like, yes, like, you can't deny those voices, you can't deny those votes, you can't deny the power, right? And I think this is, at core, this is about power, and the attempt by some to see a new day coming and trying to hold on to power in whatever ways they can, and to deny the very institutions that, when it was working for them, that America holds holds high and had held out to the world in terms of the right to vote, in terms of the ability to go to court, in terms of the ability to access healthcare, so many things that I think we've said we do better than anyone else. Now we're trying to deny to like millions of people. It's just insane.
Yeah, I think that's important work. And, my question to you is, now that the election is over, have you seen a sense of like relief, or is there this constant pushing like, hey, it's not over. Yeah, we won the election. He's out of office, but we can't get lax. We got to keep pushing. We got to keep moving. What sense do you see and feel regarding the next steps of our progress now that the election is over?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been on high alert for the last 4 years, both in terms of what is happening and the fears about what could happen with someone who is irrational, who is power hungry, who is cruel in office. And so I think there's just, and there was just such a push in 2020, certainly in my organization, my coworkers and the voting rights projects around the country, working with numerous other organizations to really seriously protect the ability to vote in the lead up to the election and the actual vote for the election. So there's a very real sigh of relief, I think, right now that we've been in this pandemic. There's been, folks on my team, we've been fighting to get folks out of prisons and jails, to just people, they're trying to take care of their families, people who are alone or isolated. There's just been so much. So there did have to be a moment of like, okay, like we got to take care of ourselves. Certainly not necessarily in the ways we might like, because of the restrictions, because of the, caregiving responsibilities for folks who are in that situation have. But I think there's definitely a sigh of relief and a moment in an attempt to regroup. But there's also there's still so much, even before Trump came into office, right? There were all these problems. Problems of police violence, problems of unequal access to economic resources, people not being able to pay for college or being saddled with student debt after college, lack of affordable housing and access to housing. And so I think there is that sigh of relief, and we don't have to, be dealing with a crisis every day, but there's also there is still so much work to do. We have to pick up that work. And we have to refocus and think about what are the things that we have struggled with since the first Europeans landed here, and the exploitation that goes back hundreds of years, and undone work that still needs to happen. And so there is the moment to rest and regroup, but frankly, it's never as long as you want it to be. And then trying to think about, okay, how we got to get to work. How are we doing that? What are we doing? How can we lift up the work and the voices of folks who are living the pain and living the crises in a even more immediate and damaging way. So I think it's both, right?
Indeed. I think sometimes it can be so daunting for the majority of folks. The problems, the landscape can seem so wrought with landmines of inequalities and systemic issues that you don't know where to jump in. You don't know where to start. And so to that point, when you talk about coming out of a 4-year stretch like we just did and being able to say, okay, we are no longer in fight or flight mode, 24/7 per se, but there's still so much work to do. And I think that's the difference between the doers and the thinkers, the understanding that there's a lot of work to do. This is, you take on this, you devour this elephant one bite at a time, and you start where you are and you begin to chip away and you celebrate those victories, and then you get back in the game. And so kudos to you for understanding that no, this fight is not over. We've just begun. Let me pivot for a second. When did you think you wanted to practice law? When did that come about for you?
Right. Yeah. I think, I was always interested in how we're going to help people. Wayne mentioned we went to Archbishop Carroll High School in DC. and there's a real emphasis and focus on social justice. And so, we had a very influential junior year of amazing teachers. So, we'll remember Mr. Hoderney and Miss Purcell, and just like thinking about it. And I come from a family of service. So, my mom was in healthcare, my dad is a social worker, my stepmom was a social worker, my grandparents, educators. So just like knowing that service was in my work and thinking about what that would look like. As we were reading about folks like Marion Wright Edelman, Thurgood Marshall, people who were lawyers, like they were, many of the people that I was impressed at the work that they did, they were lawyers. And so I think that's when I first really started to think about like what I could do, how I could be helpful in like wanting to like thinking about law in a real way and thinking about civil rights law. And then, going to law school, and a friend mentor to both of us, Roger Fairfax. So we got to give Roger a shout out.
Indeed.
He was already forging that path, and I was like, okay, I think this could be the way. I thought about education, I thought about public policy, but I was like, law seems like a really concrete way to solve problems and to help people. And so I think it was, the seed was planted in high school, but then I think as I, moved through college was really like, I think this is what I want to do. This is the path I want to follow.
Indeed. Yeah. Shout out to Roger too, man. One of the more influential mentors early on in my life. And Roger's the type that any answer you gave him, he'd say, well, you can do that through law, right? Like, you understand that.
Exactly.
I'm going the medical route. You can do that through law as well, though, right?
No, exactly.
Indeed.
But Renika, you bring up an interesting point about, the importance of mentors and helping guide and direct you. I know that a lot of young people are kind of directionless, or they're not quite sure what they want to do. They're in college, they have these majors, but they're not really sure, like, okay, what do I want to do with this? Kind of explain, for those who might be listening, just the value of that and not having those wasted years, so to speak, of not really knowing what you wanted to do, having a clear direction and a goal, early on in your career.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you like, I think a lot of times, like, I did not know the job that I do now existed. I didn't existed. Like, I didn't have a clear sense of what exactly it would look like. I was looking at trailblazers, but in some ways they have fought battles that weren't really the same for me. In terms of they were fighting Jim Crow laws, they were fighting just really blatant segregation that didn't quite exist in the same ways when I was coming up. And but we grew up in DC. It was a very segregated city. The city that we grew up in, it was violent. It was over policed. And so looking around and seeing just like the world that, like, what was wrong, like this doesn't feel right. And I think knowing that and tapping into that, and like, I feel like, don't get it twisted, these young folks are fierce. I feel like I think I'm young, and then I'm like, oh, you're doing like, and so being able to like support that and do that work, but also like provide guidance and share information. I think so much is like just demystifying the path forward. I think sometimes you look at your heroes, you look at like your role models, and like it seems like they were born that way, or like they got there overnight, and it's really like steps. And so I think seeing a need, seeing where you are in your community, in your family, in your world, and what you can do to make that happen. And like, fortunately, I had folks who like invested in me. So like Roger was like, okay, we're gonna like he was doing boot camp for us, making us break down rap lyrics, turning them into standard English,
right.
And like, you're gonna need these skills, code switching, and but at the same time, like, mentors who weren't explicitly that, but were like, I was like, oh, how does that happen? How do you do that? And being unafraid to ask and answer your own questions and think about like, how can I do this? And as much as, I think one thing to always remember is like, as much as you feel like you don't know, like there are things and there's usually someone behind you who knows less. And so sharing that can really make you realize like how much you know and how much you have to like give and share and provide. We're in this moment. We started out talking about COVID and just access. There's so many folks who don't really know how to access and navigate websites, like older folks, older Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about how you can help people just like sign up. Because if nothing else, like I know our 15-year-old knows how to navigate websites and knows how to navigate the internet and a smartphone. And that can be incredibly valuable, and figuring out how to plug in, in those ways can be hugely helpful in moving us forward, even in ways that may feel small, but are actually like, that's how stuff happens.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Now that's visual representation is huge. Huge. It's one of the things that for my life growing up in the rural South, but I grew up in this town that had 2 HBCUs. So I was surrounded by Black educators and Black professionals, in this sort of, I don't even want to call it utopian, because there were problems there. We had a majority town, but yet it was still white supremacy that ruled the day. It was just that we had created a pocket of educators and professionals that insulated those of us growing up in that space. But there was representation there. And when I got to DC, that was continued representation in terms of the professionals you saw, the lawmakers, those that you saw. So on the micro level, that's getting to know this person who does this job that you didn't think was even available to you. On the macro, it's on the big screen and on the on the airwaves and nationally and internationally being represented. But that is so important, giving the youth, giving those who don't think they can do a thing, a person to look to who they can touch, see, and feel, and say, hey, this guy is actually doing that. That guy is doing that. The dope boys in my neighborhood were always visual. They were always visibly present. And so for a lot of guys, that's all they saw. That's all they knew. Mm-hmm. So normalizing Black professionalism in whatever space you want to be. That doesn't even have to be white collar, but Black professionalism, even if you are an entrepreneur who never went to school, but you operate in a professional manner and you are able to share that with the next, is, I think, utterly important. I think it's probably I'm a huge fan of apprenticeship, which to me is just an extension of that. Mm-hmm. To touch and walk into that space that you thought was previously unavailable to you.
Right. And we had a case last year. It was a federal program that was supposed to be providing, it was called Payroll Protection Program, and it was supposed to be providing relief to small business owners when everything shut down. And it had these exclusions that were, there were a lot of reasons the program was deeply flawed, especially in its ability to give money to Black and brown businesses. And one of them was that it had these exclusions around prior arrest and conviction records. And so we sued, challenging that exclusion. And one of our clients, Saquon Merritt, who he had been to prison, he had gotten out, he was working as a paralegal at a major DC law firm, and he had also started his own electrical wiring business, and he was like committed to hiring folks who were returning home, and he was just really committed to his people, and he was like, I can do this, and I think the point about like wherever we are, wherever we find ourselves, like there's things we can do, there's things to move folks along, to share knowledge, to share information, and to like build that up. So I'm absolutely believe in that, and being able to like show folks what's out there, and not just what's being sold to us,
right.
And what we're being told that we are capable of, and what our limits are.
That's right.
Yeah, I've always said that systemic racism, when done correctly, is easy to deny if you want to, right? And so something like putting prior convictions in there, well, it's not really about Black people, but we know that it is.
Yes.
For those who are listening, who are deniers of systemic racism and systemic oppression, what are some of the ways that you're seeing and that your group is actively fighting against these things where, no, it's really real, it's really out there, and perhaps it's not as cut and dry to those who don't want to see it, but no, here's some examples of what systemic racism really is.
Right. So we were talking about arrest and conviction records and even eviction records, which disproportionately prevent Black women who are much more likely to be evicted than any other group. Like these records are used to deny people housing in the future, right? And yet we've got another case that my team is litigating, and we just got a good decision. It's a town not far from Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed last year by police. And the town, was seeing a rise in Somali refugees and Black folks. And then the city council started talking about crime, right? They started talking about, oh, we got this crime problem. They didn't. The statistic shows that they did not. But then they decided to adopt a what they called a crime-free housing ordinance, but was really just an attempt to block access to Black and brown folks. And they required landlords to do arrest and conviction records check, but also screen for anyone who had contact with the police. And so, like, part of what that meant is, like, you had folks who were domestic violence survivors who may have had the police called to their house. And then you had folks who might have been, and we've seen this across the news, the neighbors not liking them might have called the police to their house because they were having a barbecue. And so then they're put kind of on a registry, and that could lead to eviction if you had a place, or you could be denied housing even if you didn't, if you were applying to get an apartment. Because of, not just a conviction, but an arrest where you haven't been proven of anything, or even just contact with law enforcement. And it was, we were able to show, like, statistically it was being used against Black applicants, Somali applicants, because they also included an occupational cap in terms of, I'm sorry, not occupational, a residency cap in terms of how many people could live in an apartment. And the Somali families tended to be larger. So, some of what we do is look at, like, well, when did you decide to adopt this new rule, right? And over the course of my career, you can often tell very much about when a rule was adopted in terms of what its rationale and what its true reason is. And that, I remember when we were looking at firefighters, and there's been widespread discrimination against firefighters, but both on the basis of race and gender. And so I've been in the course of my career, like, litigated to open up doors and jobs for Black people, for women. And they started using these written tests to determine you had to have a high school diploma and you had to pass this test. But what we saw is that they always started adopting these tests and requirements when more Black people started applying for the job, right? And it's like, there are jobs that, like, and I remember we filed a brief with the Supreme Court, and Justice Ginsburg pointed this out, but it was sort of like, you don't give baseball players a test about baseball to see how well they play baseball, right? You want to see them play. That's and right. Similarly, fighting fires require certain skills that even if you are not able to do a paper and pencil test, you might be an amazing firefighter, and you might be the firefighter. Frankly, I could probably do well in a firefighter test. I'm not the person you want saving you in a fire.
I ain't doing it.
Right. So I think like looking at when rules start, when systems and barriers are adopted, and seeing who are they intended to, like, get in and who are they intending to keep out. We see a lot of, that's often how we investigate and think about, like, well, who's benefiting from this? And one of my colleagues who leads the Center for Constitutional Rights, Vince Warren, was like, it's not an accident that everything good or that anything that is bad disproportionately happens to Black folks, and anything good disproportionately does not happen for Black folks. Like, that's not an accident, right? Like, it's like, who's the wealthiest? It's like, it's never disproportionate. There's never anything that's good that's like, oh, that's interesting. Disproportionately, right. Black people get that. So,
That's right.
so these are not accidents. These are the way that these systems were designed to ensure, security and success for certain groups and to disadvantage others.
That's a great point because I've always looked at that, and that's been my answer. You look at any category, if the number is supposed to be high, we're low. If the number is supposed to be low, we're high. And to me, that is evidence of, hey, there's something in place here. But do you find, Renika, that the reasons given are ignorance? We just didn't know, we didn't realize it. Is that it? Or are people just blatantly out here being reckless?
Oh, I think it's both. There's enough for all kinds. I think, sometimes. So the case I talked about, them applying, I think it was quite clear. They knew, or if they didn't know, it was like it was not that hard to realize and correct, even if you didn't know. I think at the same time, there are times where like folks are well intentioned and really want, we've seen this with vaccine distribution, right? Where people will say, oh, there's vaccine hesitancy, and there is, and that is absolutely legitimate based on the experience with medical care in this country. But there's also just like systemic obstacles. So we know, there are states where, like in most states, healthcare workers were prioritized, right? And we know that in states like Maryland, where there's a sizable Black population, that the healthcare population is within the healthcare sector, employees are maybe 40% or more are Black. And so prioritizing healthcare workers, you'd expect to see similar rates of vaccination, and only something like 13% of Black healthcare workers have been vaccinated. And part of it is that we're seeing the ways in which the vaccine programs are rolled out. So, we know that there are programs where a hospital will make it available to their staff and they'll send out an email to register for an appointment. But it turns out the janitorial staff, which is disproportionately, Black and brown, are not assigned emails. So they don't have email addresses. And so it's like, oh, wait, we got to figure out a way to get them the information. And so I don't think that in those instances it is intentional, but it's like we're used to thinking about a certain group and we're not used to thinking about other groups, right? And so you see, and we don't know anyone who's in those groups, and we didn't talk to them. Right. So if we had, we would have caught that, right, in the design. And so that's where you also see, because these systems have been operating for so long, that even on autopilot, we get the same outcome. So it's like we have to be actively doing things different, right? We got to figure out, and we're going to get it wrong, but we've got to be trying, and we got to be working really hard to do things differently than we've done them.
That's right. Yeah. And in any poor people's campaign, you've got to do a new thing in a new way, because these systems were put in place, and you're right. We're running on autopilot based on systems that were put in place centuries ago. So you've got to do a new thing in a new way to get to those. And that's one of the things that you learn when you study social justice and social justice movements.
Yeah,
you've got to get on the ground to get to other folks.
Absolutely.
If you had the power to sort of enact one piece of legislation dealing with all of the things that we've been talking about, where would you? I would have to say, where would you start? Because it would only be a start. But where do you feel like you could start to get the most momentum going forward? What would you enact?
Oh, Wayne. Talking about 400 years. So I'm going to answer the question I wish you would ask me. So I'm not going to pick one. So we can set that aside. But I think, we've been talking about, there's a bill to establish a commission to study reparations. It's House Resolution 40. And, I see that as we have not really examined the legacy of racism in the modern day, through Jim Crow, through mass incarceration, through over policing and exclusion from our economy. Like we just haven't done that work. And it's like when you have, you know, a disease, when you have cancer, the first step is diagnostic, like a full scale, like we need to look at what's going on to then we understand and we can develop a treatment plan. And we've never really done that work.
Yep.
As a country. You know, Nicole Hannah-Jones has done the 1619 project. There's been some really amazing work in recent years to really holistically look at this. Ta-Nehisi Coates, you know, and I think we need the federal government to do that work. We need that work to happen really at scale. So there's that piece of legislation, and then we've also been looking at, you know, canceling student debt. We know that Black women are disproportionately affected. More than any other group, hold more student debt.
Cancel mine, please. Cancel mine. Jesus.
I mean, that always is a big winner, right? Like everybody's like, word. Like, but I think
cancel. I got a mortgage over here. Cancel it.
Right, but the reasons we have disproportionate student debt is because we're not able to buy houses and we're not able to pull on wealth, and that comes from like being redlined and like history of occupational segregation. That comes from like being excluded from the GI Bill when Black veterans came home from World War II, like where our middle class was really like undergirded and built coming out of the Great Depression and following World War II, you know, completely excluded from the educational benefits, from the real estate and housing benefits, like completely excluded from those opportunities. And so, you know, what we see today is rooted in what we did, you know, 5 minutes ago, yesterday, several years ago, a century ago. And so there's like, you know, we have like six pieces of legislations that we're really pushing. So there's HR 40, which is the Reparations Commission. There's canceling student loan debt up to $50,000. There's using existing power under the Postal Services Act to establish basic affordable financial services through post offices. You may remember your grandmother might have got money orders from the post office, but while we don't have banks in a lot of, you know, in almost half of predominantly Black zip codes, there is a post office. And so having affordable check cashing, bill paying services, you know, there's like a list of things. There's like protecting the vote. So we don't have what happened in 2020, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I could go on, but I think we need to like shore up our systems. Yeah, Wayne, I'm director of the racial justice program. You talk about one act, one bill.
One finger on the hand of Buddha.
Yes. But I think that's the point, right? There's no silver bullet. There's work we have to do. And we're gonna have to get comfortable being uncomfortable because we've neglected to do this work for a long time. And so I think, you know, we're not gonna move forward without like putting work in, but it will be well worth the reward, I think, to see us move forward on these issues.
So I have a question, one quick question, and I know we're coming up on time. This may sound crazy, but this is in regard to reparations. I'm all for them. I think all of us are, whatever form it may be most appropriate. But I get the sense that if that passes, when it passes, let's speak it into existence. Then the retort will be, well, you got your money, you got your reparations, so what are you complaining about? Like racism's over and all this kind of stuff. So that's that's the retort that I'm looking for. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think so. We're working closely with some Black-led organizations and coalitions, including NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, and some other folks who've really been looking at this for a long time. And so the bill, just to be clear, doesn't say, okay, everybody's going to get like Black folks who are whose ancestors were enslaved are going to get, you know, $1,000. Like, the commission is really like, we're going to look at it in terms of all aspects of our history, our economy, our society. So that's a first step, right? And it might be programs, it might not be payment, it might be the other thing. But I think it is in this country's nature to be like, well, we're good now, right? We're good. And so I think that is a real fear and a real danger. But it's like, I think I also feel like that shouldn't stop us from doing the work and looking at what we need to do. And it's like, that's a problem I'd like to have, right? I'd like us to do and make a real commitment to addressing this. And I was like, I'm cool with that problem.
Yeah.
Because I do think sometimes we get paralyzed by like, well, if we do that, and myself included, right? Like it's like, well, you know what people are going to come back with if people are continuing to suffer and continuing. But the point is that we as a people, we want to ensure that everyone gets ahead, right? Like we want people to succeed. We want people to not be in pain. We want people to not be locked up. We want people to not be sick, right? And so if we still have people getting sick, if we still have people getting locked up, if we still have people who are who can't find safe, secure housing, we need to figure out why, right? We need to like, and it might be that like something else is going on, but if it's still race, we need to deal with race, right? And I think sometimes people accept the terms of the debate that there is going to be a shortage and that there are going to be some people who are hurt, some people who are in pain, some people who are unable to access safe and adequate housing or jobs. And it's like, I refuse to accept that premise. And so if that is happening, we will continue to like figure out what we need to do and do that work. So.
Indeed. Totally out in left field. Your legal counsel starting five. If you had to put together your dream team from all eras, who would it be?
I'm going to stick with people not currently.
Okay.
These are my colleagues, and I don't want to be in a situation of not naming someone.
Very safe for
you. So, I think Charles Hamilton Houston, architect of Brown versus Board of Education, and really just brought a real theory of social engineering through the law. Just a brilliant, hardworking person. He died before Brown was argued, but certainly wouldn't have happened without him. I think Pauli Murray is an unsung hero. I recently saw a documentary about Pauli Murray, Black lawyer, also helped to craft the arguments that were used for Brown, and many others, the women's rights, equal rights, some of the critical litigation that moved gender rights forward. Pauli Murray was thinking about them, writing about them, litigating them. Pauli Murray would be on the team. I think, let's see, Shirley Chisholm is a trained lawyer, activist, advocate, would absolutely be on my team. I think, God, this is hard to like. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like. I'm already down to two.
You only got two left.
Right, exactly. So I think I really, I guess I'll use my last two for two of my professors who really were instrumental in investing in their students and everything. And so that's Charles Ogletree and Lonnie Guinier. They both were really, I think, brilliant as professors and willing to put in the time and the work with their students to like help them craft and think about their dreams. So 5. Yeah.
That's 5 that'll change the world right there, though.
Right. Right.
So as we get ready to head out, what are some ways, some really tangible ways that we can get involved, in neighborhoods, church communities, schools, things of that nature? What are some things that we can do? We're not lawyers, anything like that, but how can we really get involved to help move our march towards social justice and racial justice?
I think there are a couple things that can be done, right? So, well, there's many. So the ACLU is a membership organization. NAACP is a membership organization. I think Black Lives Matter movement. There's like different types of networks and entities you can plug into to like learn more. I encourage folks to do that. I think there's a lot that actually happens on the local level, like the local and state level in terms of budgeting. And, you'll often hear a budget is a moral document. And so I think when we look at like spending and how much spending we put into law enforcement and into the various ways of policing people, surveilling people, that learning about your local budget and learning about what are the things you want to support, schools, healthcare, services for folks in crisis, getting police out of schools. Like those are a lot of those things, those decisions and budgeting decisions happen at the city, even sub-city, in terms of your ward, your city council district, those pieces. So I think knowing who your representatives are, pushing for those kind of protections, and forcing people to put their money where their mouth is huge, huge. I mentioned the case about the local ordinance. That happened at a city council meeting. So like finding out what people are doing and ensuring that like we're moving toward equity, we're moving toward equality. We're trying to make the tent bigger, bring folks in. I think is critically important. And so getting involved in your local budgeting process, ensuring that people are spending on the things you want, and not, ballooning our kind of law enforcement apparatus is critical. And then I think vote, what happens at the federal level is equally important, is also important, but really there's some basic stuff that often a lot of people neglect and don't look into. So I really encourage folks to study up on their local politics and try to change how we spend our dollars.
No doubt. Renika, we appreciate you.
Yes, thank you so much.
On your bid to run for that national platform. You keep doing the work wherever you see fit.
Yes.
I love that. Exactly. I tell my son all the time, your circle has got to be, you want your circle to be full of people who make you better, who push you to be better.
Absolutely.
The flip side of that coin is you need to keep some folks around you who know you so that they can hold you to task.
Right.
I like to feel like I have people in my circle that sort of embody both of those spirits that are definitely doing those things that when I wake up in the morning, I say, oh, you got work to do.
Right.
And in the same time can call and say, your drawers still smell. So
right.
I appreciate it. I do.
I was about to say you have a better, more euphemistic terms. Like, the one is like the board of directors. You want people who will like push you and do things. And then like the term I use, Wayne also knows one of my best oldest friends, Casey, and she's my dark lord of truth. And you need people who we call them your dark lord of truth, who's like, so you think you're gonna do that for real? Because I'm saying you can't, you just never. So I was just, how exactly is that going to happen? And like keeping you honest and real, and accountable is absolutely necessary.
I would be the one to just go, and Casey would be the one to say, you're gonna do that, huh?
Right. What's your plan? Like, how does this play out?
Figure it out when I get there, Casey. With thanks.
Real words that I think were spoken.
Right. And look forward to getting together with you whenever all of this is behind you.
Absolutely. It is fantastic to see you and meet you, Dre.
Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
And I'm looking for a stylist because my fashion game has really like in this COVID. So I'm gonna hit y'all up about some references.
We got you. All right, that's it for us. Anything else you got, Dre?
That's it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Peace.